Let's kick off with the seismic shifts rippling across North America. Picture this. Autonomous, agentic AI systems are now charting their own course, not just crunching data, but actually making decisions in logistics, finance, and even creative work. That's what we mean by agentic AI, and it's upending business models faster than many can adapt. But here's the twist. While AI booms, economic uncertainty grows. With tariffs and trade tweaks under President Trump, U.S. tech firms face a tangled global supply web. Now, you might be thinking, isn't innovation supposed to lift all boats? Well, federal budget shifts, deep cuts to Medicaid and education are pressing states like California and Colorado to shoulder the regulatory and social burdens. Imagine a startup founder in Denver, grappling not only with Colorado's pioneering AI risk regulations, but also with parents worried about slashed school funding. And looming over it all, the staggering reality that 47 million Americans struggle with food insecurity. The question isn't just, can we build smarter machines, but can we build a smarter, fairer society as AI changes everything? Let me tell you a story. Last month, I spoke with a school principal in Ohio. She described how an AI-powered learning tool helps her students, but budget cuts mean fewer counselors and after-school meals. The promise of technology meets harsh political realities. This is North America's dilemma, a technological gold rush in a period of profound economic anxiety. So, what happens next? The answer depends not just on the algorithms, but on the choices leaders make about trade, social safety nets, and who gets a seat at the table. Now, let's turn our focus south to a continent where migration flows and climate stakes are rewriting the political script. Brazil's prepping for COP30 in Belém, a city at the edge of the Amazon. Imagine the spotlight. World leaders descending into the rainforest to hammer out climate deals, while wildfires and deforestation threaten indigenous homelands. But there's another current running beneath the surface: migration diplomacy. With changing U.S. prime, deportation policies, Ecuador and Venezuela are locked in tense negotiations, balancing humanitarian needs with political optics. You might wonder, can regional cooperation outpace crisis? Meanwhile, in Peru, the Chinese-funded Shanghai megaport is transforming trade. Think of it as a new Panama Canal, rerouting global shipping lanes and amplifying China's strategic leverage in South America. But as headlines blare about gang violence and high-profile corruption busts, ordinary citizens face daily risks. And don't overlook the powerful voices of Mapuche women in Argentina, protesting state persecution and defending indigenous rights. Here's the conflict. South America stands at a geopolitical crossroads, its leaders juggling short-term pressures with long-term survival. The resolution? It hinges on whether climate talks, trade deals, and grassroots activism can converge to craft a more stable, just future. Across the Atlantic, Europe's in the throes of security, uncertainty, and scientific ambition. Picture the scene at the recent European Political Community Summit. Leaders debating how to bolster Ukraine while guarding against hybrid threats, that's military aggression mixed with cyber attacks and misinformation. Now, you might ask, can unity survive amid political friction? France and Germany are grappling with volatile governments, budget disputes, and mounting pressure over migration policies. But here's the setup for Act 2. Europe's rolling out a scientific moonshot, a CERN for AI, aiming to harness artificial intelligence for breakthroughs in research, using public-private partnerships as a catalyst. Think of CERN's Hadron Collider, but for algorithms. As the EU funds clean tech and industrial reform under Horizon Europe, the continent faces a dual challenge: decarbonizing old industries while investing in defense and migration infrastructure. Let me ask, will European science and policy converge fast enough to meet both security needs and green ambitions? The resolution, if it comes, will require nimble leadership and public trust in institutions. Without it, Europe risks falling behind on both fronts. Africa is often discussed as a continent of promise, but too rarely as a powerhouse of agency. That story's changing. The African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, is set to increase intra-African trade by a projected 52% by 2035. Imagine Kenyan coffee reaching Nigerian markets with fewer hurdles thanks to customs harmonization that's tariff liberalization in action. But here's Act 2. Sovereignty tensions are brewing. Sahel states are breaking away from ECOWAS, forming new security alliances as chronic instability persists. Now, you might say, what about debt? Ghana and Zambia have secured restructuring deals with China, opening fiscal space for growth. But these wins are fragile, as climate shocks from droughts to cyclones threaten progress. At the Africa CEO Forum, leaders called for fairer global finance frameworks, arguing that resilience isn't just about aid, but investment in local innovation. Rwanda's push for gender equality and technical education is a case in point. So, can Africa leverage its trade gains to build climate-resilient, inclusive economies? The answer rests on deepening integration while defending hard-won sovereignty. Asia's economic dynamism is accelerating, and there's a digital current running just below the surface. Let's break it down. India's betting big on trade liberalization, forging new regional alliances while courting foreign investment. Over in China, the latest 5-year plan pushes for tech resilience. Think of it as building a digital firewall to insulate from global supply shocks. At the same time, China's doubling down on export strategy, moving beyond the old Made in China 2025 blueprint to dominate the next wave of green and digital tech. But here's the setup. Taiwan's security remains a flashpoint shaped by shifting U.S.-Japan military ties. ASEAN's leadership is also in flux, with newcomers steering policy on climate and commerce. And threading through it all, Asia's surging generative AI sector platforms that create new text, images, or data, akin to having a hyper-creative assistant at your fingertips. Are these innovations a recipe for regional peace, or a new battleground for strategic rivalry? That's the conflict. The real test is whether Asia's tech boom can drive inclusive growth or deepen divides. Let's head down under, where Australia is balancing old alliances with bold reforms. The Australia-Singapore Pact has expanded military access, strengthening strategic ties across Southeast Asia. But there's more. Employers now face jail time for wage theft, signaling a crackdown on labor exploitation. That's regulatory enforcement in action. Meanwhile, new bans on single-use plastics and tighter emissions rules are nudging consumers towards greener habits. Major infrastructure projects, metro tunnels, new art galleries, cultural precincts are nearing completion, promising a burst of economic and social energy. But inflation bites, passport fees are up, and travel is getting pricier. Now, you might wonder, will Australians accept these changes as the cost of progress? Or does reform fatigue loom? The answer will be written in the nation's willingness to balance economic resilience with social and environmental responsibility. To close, let's journey to the world's coldest continent. Antarctica is sounding the alarm on climate change in ways that are both dramatic and deeply instructive. Sea ice collapse, that's the sudden, irreversible loss of ice sheets, threatens to rewrite global weather patterns. Picture a temperature surge of 35 degrees Celsius above normal, unleashing atmospheric chaos that impacts crops, coastlines, and cities half a world away. Scientists have confirmed H5N1 avian flu in multiple bird colonies, a grim reminder of how interconnected ecosystems really are. And this year, methane columns have been detected bubbling up from deep-sea vents. That's a greenhouse gas with 25 times the warming power of CO2. But here's the resolution. The EPICA project has drilled a 1.2 million-year-old ice core, unlocking clues to past climate shifts and future tipping points. The Antarctic story isn't just about loss, it's about the urgent quest for knowledge and the race to act before tipping points turn into breaking points.